Snow fell past the floor-to-ceiling windows of Valerius Tower like silent witnesses, delicate and cold, beautiful from a distance. Inside the penthouse, nothing felt beautiful. The office gleamed with black marble and chrome, decorated with a single arrangement of white roses so perfect they looked artificial, and frosted glass panels that caught the city's Christmas lights in fragmented reds and golds. But the air pressed against Isolde Vance's lungs like something alive, thick with the scent of aged leather and something older, metallic, ancestral. She sat alone at the obsidian desk, her coat still buttoned to her throat, her hands folded in her lap because she hadn't been able to touch anything yet. The silver stylus lay centered on top of the blood oath contract, its tip sharp enough to pierce skin. All she had to do was reach for it. "Whenever you are ready, Miss Vance," the vampire attorney said softly from the corner of the room, his voice carrying that practiced serenity meant to soothe humans during the worst transactions of their lives. Isolde nodded, though she felt anything but ready. This wasn't how Christmas Eve was supposed to look. Not for her. Not for the girl who had grown up believing in tinsel and miracles, hot chocolate and late-night laughter with her sister. A girl who once thought her biggest sacrifice would be working double shifts or giving up a dream. Now she sat in a room with recessed lighting that pulsed like a slow heartbeat and a sound system whispering a dark choral arrangement of "O Holy Night" through hidden speakers, each note twisting the hymn into something funereal. The stylist didn't move, neither did she. Isolde had spent weeks preparing for this moment. Her sister's medical bills stacked like a death sentence. The experimental treatment that only Dominic Valerius's wealth could afford. The contract negotiations conducted through intermediaries in coffee shops and hospital waiting rooms. She had studied every clause, every blood-binding implication, but nothing had prepared her for the weight of sitting here, alone, about to sign away her freedom in a room that smelled like power and predation. The door opened without a sound. She didn't turn. She didn't need to. She knew his presence before she heard his footsteps, the way prey knows when an apex predator enters the room. She knew his scent, dark cologne layered over something ancient and copper-sweet that made her pulse quicken in ways she hated. Dominic Valerius stepped into his own office with the quiet authority of someone who had owned the night for centuries. Tailored black suit, perfect posture, movements so fluid they seemed choreographed. A man, or something wearing the shape of one, built for seduction and dominance in equal measure. "Isolde," he said, her name like silk dragged across broken glass. She looked up. He stood across the desk, his expression unreadable. No fangs visible, no red eyes, just the polished restraint of a creature who had learned to hide his nature behind boardroom manners. But she saw it anyway, the hunger, the calculation, the absolute certainty that she was already his. "You don't have to stay," she said, her voice steadier than her heartbeat. "The contract's clear. I sign, you transfer the funds for Emma's treatment." "No," Dominic replied, moving to the leather chair opposite her with predatory grace. "I should be here for this." The words sounded courteous. The tone felt like ownership. You were supposed to offer another way, she thought bitterly. Any other way. Dominic settled into his seat, leaving barely 3 feet of obsidian between them, a distance that felt simultaneously vast and suffocating. His eyes, dark, ancient, impossibly focused, traced her face like he was memorizing every detail of the moment she became his. Outside, church bells chimed across the snowy city, muffled and mournful. "The terms are standard for a blood oath," the attorney said gently, stepping forward with rehearsed efficiency. "Miss Vance provides her service and blood for a period of 7 years. Mr. Valerius provides full financial support for Emma Vance's medical care, including the Lazarus Protocol treatment. The bond is absolute and cannot be dissolved except by mutual consent or," he paused delicately, "the death of one party." Isolde's gaze dropped back to the contract. Her hand hovered over the stylus. Dominic studied her with the intensity of something that had hunted for lifetimes. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Is this truly what you want, Isolde?" A question that came years too late for the girl she used to be. She swallowed against the tightness in her throat. "I didn't come here to negotiate. I came to save my sister." Dominic inclined his head slowly, though something flickered in his expression, surprise, perhaps, or recognition. As if he'd expected her to beg or break, and her composure was somehow more interesting than either. He leaned back, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "You understand what you're agreeing to." "I understand you're the only monster willing to pay for a miracle," she replied, the words leaving her mouth before she could stop them. The attorney inhaled sharply. Even the shadows in the room seemed to pause. But Dominic smiled, not with offense but with something darker, appreciation. "Then we understand each other," he murmured. Isolde forced her attention back to the parchment. The opening clause blurred. The second line blurred more. Her fingers closed around the stylus, its silver cold and sharp against her palm. "I thought I'd be more afraid than this," she whispered, half to herself. Dominic's expression shifted, just enough to reveal something beneath the corporate veneer. Not humanity, but something close, memory of it, maybe. "Fear would be wiser," he said quietly, "but courage is far more valuable." "I'm not courageous, I'm desperate." Most revolutions begin that way. She didn't know what he meant, didn't want to. Isolde lifted the stylus. The contract required blood, not ink. The tip pricked her thumb, and crimson welled immediately, brighter than it should be, almost luminous in the low light. Her hand trembled, but she didn't stop. She signed her name once in the designated space, each stroke cutting away another thread of the life she thought she'd live. Isolde Catherine Vance. When she finished, she set the stylus down and pushed the contract toward him with deliberate care, her blood still wet on the parchment. Dominic stared at her signature. For the first time since entering, his perfect composure fractured, just a tightening around his eyes, a sharpness in his inhale, as if her blood had whispered something unexpected into the ancient magic woven through the oath. "Something wrong?" she asked, voice hollow. "No," he said, though he didn't sound certain. "Nothing at all." He took the stylus. Unlike her, his blood came without hesitation, without pain, dark and thick as aged wine. He signed with one smooth, elegant motion, then again beside the witness clause. The moment his name touched the parchment, the air ignited. Not with fire, but with something colder, a pulse of energy that swept through the room like a silent detonation, rattling the windows and dimming the lights. The contract flared gold, then crimson, then settled into something that looked burned into the paper itself. The attorney cleared his throat nervously. "The oath is sealed. Miss Vance, you are bound." Bound, the word tasted like ash. Dominic stood, fastening the single button of his suit jacket with practiced precision. Isolde rose too, her legs unsteady, the room tilting slightly as if the world had shifted on its axis. For a moment, they simply looked at each other across the desk. "You'll have accommodations prepared in the East Wing," Dominic said, his voice returning to its careful neutrality. "Someone will collect you tomorrow evening." She nodded, unable to trust her voice. He turned toward the door, but before he reached it, she whispered, "I hope it was worth it." He stopped, not dramatically, just a pause long enough to betray the weight of the moment. "Ask me again in 7 years," he said without looking back. Then he left. The door shut with a soft click, the lock engaging automatically. It echoed through her like a cell door closing. Isolde stood alone in the penthouse, snow still falling outside like the world hadn't just ended, the scent of blood and ancient magic thick in her throat. And on Dominic Valerius's throne, visible through the glass wall separating his office from his private sanctum, a mark began to glow. Gold, pulsing, burning itself into the black velvet like a brand. The heir's mark. Isolde pressed a hand to her abdomen, where something impossible had just begun to quicken, and realized with terrible clarity. The vampire king hadn't bought a servant tonight. He'd created his own executioner. If you love stories where power is taken, not given, subscribe. These stories survive because people like you choose to stay. The penthouse felt colder after Dominic left, as if his presence had been the only thing keeping the shadows at bay. Isolde stood frozen at the obsidian desk, her thumbs still bleeding sluggishly from the stylus prick. The contract now vanished, taken by the attorney who had disappeared through some side door she hadn't noticed before. She should leave, collect her coat, walk to the elevator, go home to her sister's hospital room and pretend the last hour hadn't carved her life into before and after. But she couldn't move. Through the glass wall, separating the office from Dominic's private sanctum, something was wrong with his throne. The massive chair sat on a raised dais, carved from a single piece of black stone that looked older than the building, older than the city itself. Isolde had glimpsed it earlier when the attorney first led her through the penthouse, had felt instinctively that it didn't belong in a place with chrome and recessed lighting. It belonged in catacombs, in burial chambers where kings were entombed with their crowns still on. Now it was glowing. Not the throne itself, but something on it. A mark burning into the velvet seat cushion like a brand pressed into flesh. Gold, pulsing with each flare of light, spreading across the black fabric in elegant, serpentine lines that formed a symbol Isolde didn't recognize but somehow understood. A crest, a seal, a claim of sovereignty. She moved toward the glass without thinking, her hand pressed against the cold surface, her breath fogging it slightly. The mark continued to grow, intricate as lace, vicious as a scar, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. "What did I do?" she whispered. The moment the words left her mouth, pain bloomed in her abdomen. Not sharp, not sudden, but deep and rolling, like something ancient waking from a long sleep. Isolde gasped, doubling over, her free hand clutching her stomach as the sensation intensified, not agony, but overwhelming presence, as if something immense had just taken root inside her and was now unfurling. Heat, pressure, a pulse that didn't match her heartbeat. She stumbled back from the glass, her vision swimming, the Christmas lights of the city outside blurring into streaks of red and gold. Her knees hit the floor, the cold marble biting through her slacks, and she pressed both palms flat against her abdomen, trying to understand what was happening to her body. The pulse came again, stronger, deliberate. Thump. Not her heart. Thump. Something else. Thump. Something new. "No," Isolde breathed, the word more prayer than denial. "No, that's not possible." But even as she said it, she knew. The blood oath hadn't just bound her to Dominic Valerius. It had done something else, something the attorney's careful legal language had never mentioned, something the ancient magic woven through vampire contracts had decided on its own. She was carrying life. Impossible, supernatural, unprecedented life. Her hands trembled against her stomach as another wave of that presence rolled through her, and this time it brought images, flashes of gold and shadow, of crowns forged in darkness, of bloodlines that stretched back to when humanity still feared the night. She saw thrones burning, saw kingdoms falling, saw a child with eyes that held both sunset and starlight, neither fully human nor fully vampire, but something the world had never seen. The first hybrid in a millennium. The heir. Isolde's breath came in sharp, shallow gasps. She tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't support her, the enormity of what had just happened crushing the air from her lungs. Minutes. It had been minutes since she signed the oath, minutes since Dominic's blood touched the parchment alongside hers, and already something impossible was growing inside her with the speed and certainty of magic that recognized no natural law. Through the glass wall, the mark on the throne blazed brighter, as if responding to the life quickening in her womb, as if the two were connected by invisible threads of destiny and blood. The heir's mark. Her mark. She hadn't just signed away her freedom tonight. She had signed a declaration of war against every law that governed the vampire world, against Dominic himself, whether he knew it yet or not. Isolde pressed her forehead against the cold marble floor, her dark hair spilling around her face, her body shaking with the weight of transformation. Outside, the snow continued to fall over the city, soft and indifferent. Christmas Eve stretched toward midnight, and somewhere in the building below, Dominic Valerius was still celebrating his acquisition, still believing he had purchased a servant, a blood source, a convenient solution to whatever immortal boredom plagued him. He had no idea he'd just created the one thing that could destroy him. Isolde smiled against the marble, the expression edged with something wild and terrified and fierce. "Merry Christmas," she whispered to the child already rewriting her fate. The throne's mark pulsed gold in answer. Isolde didn't know how long she stayed on the floor, her body curled around the impossible thing growing inside her. But when she finally forced herself to stand, the city lights had shifted from celebration to something quieter, lonelier. Midnight was approaching. Christmas Eve bleeding into Christmas morning. She needed to leave. Now, before someone came to collect her, before the vampire guards stationed throughout Valerius Tower noticed the throne glowing like a beacon in the sanctum, before Dominic himself returned and saw what his blood oath had created. But her legs still trembled. Her mind still reeled with the weight of the quickening. She took one unsteady step toward the door, then stopped. A voice, not in the room but in her head, clear and cold as winter water. Satisfactory, the girl signed without theatrics. No begging, no tears. Perhaps this arrangement will prove less tedious than... Isolde gasped, pressing her palm against her temple. The voice was male, refined, edged with centuries of boredom barely held at bay. She knew it immediately, intimately, as if she'd been listening to it her entire life. "Dominic. Marcus worries too much. 7 years of service for one human life is more than fair." She understood the terms. She made her choice. "Stop," Isolde whispered, but the thoughts continued pouring through the blood bond, uninvited and relentless. She could feel him somewhere in the building below, moving through his domain with that predatory grace, completely unaware that she was inside his mind, hearing every private calculation, every dismissive assessment of the woman he'd just bound to himself. Still something about her signature, the way her blood touched the parchment. Marcus will check the oath for anomalies in the morning. Better to be certain. Panic spiked through Isolde's chest. If they examined the contract, if they discovered what had happened, what was happening inside her right now, she wouldn't survive the night. The vampire court didn't forgive abominations. They burned them. She focused on Dominic's thoughts, searching desperately for information she could use. Guards change at midnight. North elevator. Simmons always takes an extra 10 minutes on Christmas Eve, sentimental fool. There, her window. Isolde grabbed her coat from the back of the chair, her movements sharp and precise despite the trembling in her hands. She didn't bother with her purse, didn't waste time on anything except getting to that north elevator before the guard rotation trapped her on the top floor. The penthouse door opened silently under her touch, the lock disengaged, as if the building itself wanted her gone. Maybe it did. Maybe the magic woven through Valerius Tower recognized what she carried and was already trying to expel the threat before it could fully manifest. The hallway stretched before her, all black marble and crimson accent lighting, cameras in every corner. But Isolde could still hear Dominic's thoughts, could track his location through the bond like a compass pointing toward her own destruction. East Wing preparations can wait until tomorrow. Tonight I'll review the quarterly reports from the London estate. He was moving away from her, descending deeper into the tower toward his private offices. She had minutes at most. Isolde ran. Not frantically, but with the focused speed of someone who understood the cost of hesitation. Her boots barely made a sound against the polished floor. The north elevator came into view, its brass doors gleaming like a portal to salvation, and she could see through Dominic's thoughts that Simmons hadn't returned yet from his extended break, that the security feed for this corridor looped on a 3-minute delay because of some glitch no one had bothered to fix. 3 minutes. She had 3 minutes of invisibility. She pressed the call button, her breath coming in sharp bursts, her hand instinctively moving to her abdomen where the quickening pulsed steadily, constantly, a heartbeat that didn't belong to her but was somehow more real than her own. The elevator arrived with a soft chime that sounded deafening in the empty hallway. Isolde stepped inside and pressed the button for the ground floor, then pressed it again, then a third time as if that would make the doors close faster. Her reflection stared back at her from the mirrored walls, pale and wild-eyed, her dark hair disheveled, her lipstick smeared where she'd bitten her lip to keep from screaming during the quickening. She looked like a fugitive. She was a fugitive. The doors began to slide shut, and in that final second before they closed completely, Dominic's thoughts shifted. Wait, something's wrong, the sanctum. The elevator descended, carrying her away from the penthouse, away from the glowing throne and the vampire king who was just beginning to realize his prize had escaped. Isolde pressed both hands against her stomach, feeling that impossible pulse beneath her palms, and forced herself to breathe through the terror. The glass cage had opened. She'd slipped through while the predator wasn't watching. But she could still hear his thoughts, could feel the exact moment he entered his sanctum and saw the mark burning into his throne. Could feel his rage ignite like a star-going supernova. Find her, find Heir. The elevator reached the ground floor. The doors opened onto the lobby, decorated with white poinsettias and silver wreaths, empty except for one bored security guard watching a portable television behind the desk. Isolde stepped out into the night, into the snow that was still falling like a benediction or a curse, and disappeared into the city before anyone could stop her. Behind her, Valerius Tower blazed with sudden, furious light. The hunt had begun. Dominic Valerius stood before his throne, perfectly still, and tried to remember the last time he'd felt genuine surprise. A century ago? 2. Emotions dulled after the first 500 years, worn smooth by endless repetition until even rage became a performance, anger a costume he wore because others expected it. But this was real. The mark blazed across his throne like molten gold poured into obsidian, the ancient symbol burning itself deeper with each passing second. He knew this crest. Every vampire over 100 years old knew it, had seen it rendered in crumbling texts and forbidden archives, always accompanied by warnings written in blood. The heir's mark, the sign of the progenitors chosen, the brand that appeared only once in a millennium when the old bloodlines recognized their superior. On his throne, Dominic's hand trembled as he reached toward the velvet seat, then stopped inches away. The heat radiating from the mark was wrong, older than him, older than the tower, older than the carefully constructed empire he'd built over centuries of calculated dominance. This wasn't vampire magic. This was something that predated vampires entirely, something from when the night itself was still learning to hunt. "Marcus," he said quietly, his voice carrying the kind of calm that preceded massacres. His second-in-command materialized from the shadows near the doorway, his expression already tight with concern. Marcus Thorne had served Dominic for 3 centuries, had seen wars and plagues and the rise and fall of kingdoms, but even he stopped dead when he saw the throne. "My lord," Marcus breathed, "that's not possible." "Apparently it is." Dominic gestured toward the mark without touching it. "Tell me what you see." Marcus moved closer, his scholarly instincts overriding his survival ones. He'd been a monk before Dominic turned him, spent his mortal life studying ancient texts and forbidden prophecies. Now that knowledge made his face go ash-pale. "The heir's mark," Marcus whispered. "The sign of the true blood. It only appears when—" He stopped, his eyes widening. "When the progenitor's lineage awakens, when someone carries the first hybrid." "The girl," Dominic's voice was sharp as broken glass, "Isolde Vance." "That's impossible, my lord. Humans can't carry vampire offspring. The biology doesn't." "Look at my throne, and tell me again what's impossible." Marcus fell silent. They both stared at the mark, watching it pulse with a heartbeat that wasn't Dominic's, wasn't Marcus's, wasn't anything that should exist in this carefully ordered world of corporate vampirism and blood contracts. Dominic's mind raced, replaying every moment of the signing. The way Isolde's blood had looked too bright against the parchment. The strange pulse of energy when their signatures met. The fact that she'd shown no fear, only fierce determination, as if she'd known exactly what she was doing even when she couldn't have possibly known. "She played me," he said softly, the realization settling over him like frost. "My lord, with respect, how could a human girl?" "She didn't play me intentionally." Dominic turned from the throne, his movements controlled despite the fury building in his chest. "She had no idea what she was signing, what she was becoming, but the magic knew. The old blood recognized something in her that I missed." He crossed to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the city where Isolde had disappeared. He could still feel her through the blood bond, a bright thread of terror and defiance somewhere in the snowy streets below, moving fast, running from him without understanding that running was useless. "Find her," Dominic ordered. "Quietly. I want every resource we have tracking her movements, but no violence. Not yet." "My lord, if she's carrying the heir, the court will demand." "The court will demand nothing until I decide what this means." Dominic's reflection in the glass looked strange to him suddenly, less like a king and more like something obsolete. If the prophecies are true, if she's actually carrying the first hybrid in a millennium, then everything changes. "Changes how?" Dominic smiled, the expression holding no warmth. "She's not my servant, Marcus. According to every law that governs our kind, every ancient covenant written before Rome fell, she's my queen, my superior. The mark on my throne isn't decoration. It's a declaration. She has claimed my seat of power without even knowing it." Marcus looked like he might be sick. "What will you do?" "What any king does when he discovers someone stronger has entered his kingdom." Dominic turned from the window, his eyes darker than they'd been in centuries, lit with something between rage and fascination. "I'm going to find her. I'm going to understand what she is, and then I'm going to decide whether to kneel or kill her." "And if she won't give you the choice?" The question hung in the air between them. Through the blood bond, Dominic felt Isolde's pulse quicken, felt her fear spike as she sensed his attention focusing on her across the distance. She was strong, this human girl who'd signed her name in blood. Stronger than she knew. But he'd been strong for 5 centuries. "Then we'll find out which prophecy is true," Dominic said quietly. "The one that says the heir will unite the bloodlines and bring a new dawn, or the one that says she'll burn the old world to ash and rule over the ruins." He touched the glass where her path had taken her into the city, his palm leaving a cold print. Either way, Isolde Vance just became the most dangerous creature alive. Behind him, the heir's mark pulsed brighter, as if agreeing. Christmas morning broke over Valerius Tower, and in the sanctum of the Vampire King, the throne burned with gold fire, waiting for its true owner to return. The subway platform was nearly empty at 3 in the morning, just a handful of night shift workers and insomniacs scattered along the benches, too lost in their own exhaustion to notice the girl in the black coat pressed against the far wall, trying to become invisible. Isolde had been moving through the underground for hours, changing trains at random, following no pattern except away from Valerius Tower and the rage she could still feel burning through the blood bond. The quickening pulsed steadily in her abdomen, a constant reminder of the impossible thing growing inside her, changing her, rewriting her biology with every heartbeat. She needed answers, needed to understand what she'd become. "Miss Vance." The voice came from directly behind her, cultured and careful, and Isolde spun with her back against the tile wall, her heart hammering against her ribs. A man stood 3 feet away, hands raised in a gesture of peace, his expression more scholarly than threatening. Older than he looked, she sensed instinctively. Much older. "My name is Marcus Thorne," he said quietly. "I serve Dominic Valerius. I'm not here to harm you." Isolde's hand moved to her stomach protectively. "Then, why are you here?" "Because you're going to die without help." Marcus lowered his hands slowly, glancing down the platform to ensure they weren't being observed. "And because I've spent 300 years studying prophecies that I never thought I'd see fulfilled. You need to know what you're carrying, what you've become." "How did you find me?" "You're using the blood bond to track Dominic's location, avoiding anywhere he might be." Marcus's lips quirked in something that might have been a smile. But the bond works both ways, Miss Vance. You're broadcasting your terror like a beacon. Isolde's jaw tightened. She'd been so focused on sensing Dominic's thoughts that she hadn't considered he could feel hers just as clearly. He knows where I am. He knows the general direction. I convinced him to let me come alone. Marcus reached slowly into his coat, pulling out a leather-bound book so old the cover had cracked like dried skin. I told him if anyone could talk sense into you, it would be the scholar, not the predator. And what happens when you take me back to him? I'm not taking you anywhere. Marcus extended the book toward her, his expression grave. I'm giving you the only weapon that matters, information. Isolde stared at the book without touching it. What is it? The Sanguine Texts, the oldest surviving record of vampire origin, written before we learned to hide behind corporations and cocktail parties, before we pretended to be civilized. Marcus's voice dropped lower. It explains what the Heir's mark means, what the quickening will do to you, how to survive what's coming. A train rumbled into the station, its brakes shrieking, but neither of them moved. Why would you help me? Isolde demanded. You serve him, you've served him for centuries. I serve the truth first. Marcus pressed the book into her hands before she could refuse, his fingers cold even through her gloves. And the truth, Miss Vance, is that you're carrying the first hybrid in a millennium. The child of both bloodlines, human and vampire, neither and both. According to the prophecies, that child will either unite our worlds or destroy them entirely. Isolde clutched the book against her chest, feeling its weight like a sentence. I didn't ask for this. No one ever does. Marcus stepped back as the train doors opened, passengers shuffling on and off with the mindless rhythm of routine. But you signed the oath. You mixed your blood with his, and the old magic doesn't care about intention, only action. What am I supposed to do? Read the texts. Understand your power before Dominic decides you're too dangerous to let live. Marcus glanced over his shoulder, his expression tightening. He's coming this way. You have maybe 10 minutes before he reaches this station. Panic spiked through Isolde's chest. Where do I go? Somewhere holy, somewhere the old laws still hold. Marcus was already backing away, melting into the crowd of departing passengers. Churches, cathedrals, consecrated ground. He can't enter without invitation. It's one of the few protections that still works. Marcus, Isolde's voice cracked, will he kill me? The scholar paused at the edge of the platform, his ancient eyes holding centuries of witnessed violence. I don't know. He's never encountered anything he couldn't control before. But Miss Vance, you need to understand something critical. What? The mark on his throne isn't just symbolic. It's a transfer of power. According to the texts, you didn't just conceive an heir tonight. You claimed his kingdom, his authority, his crown. Marcus's expression was unreadable. Dominic doesn't know whether to worship you or destroy you, and until he decides, you need to become strong enough that his decision doesn't matter. The subway doors began to close. Isolde lunged forward, catching them just in time, and threw herself into the car. Through the window, she saw Marcus standing alone on the platform, watching her escape with the resigned expression of a man who just committed treason. The train pulled away, carrying her deeper into the city's underground veins. Isolde opened the Sanguine Texts with trembling hands, the ancient pages crackling under her touch. The first chapter was titled in faded ink that looked suspiciously like dried blood, on the nature of the progenitors chosen and the price of sovereignty. Outside the windows, the tunnel darkness rushed past like a promise or a threat. And through the blood bond, she felt Dominic getting closer with every second, his rage transmuting into something more dangerous. Curiosity. The cathedral had been abandoned by the church decades ago, sold to developers who'd gutted the interior and transformed the nave into luxury lofts with exposed brick and industrial lighting. But they'd kept the bones, the vaulted stone ceilings, the stained glass windows depicting saints whose names no one remembered, the consecrated foundation that still hummed with whatever made holy ground holy. Isolde found it just before dawn, stumbling through streets slick with new snow, the Sanguine Texts clutched against her chest like a shield. The building's directory listed the third-floor unit as vacant, awaiting renovation, and the lock yielded to her desperate fumbling after only 3 tries. She didn't question her luck, didn't have the luxury of questioning anything except survival. The loft was half-finished, caught between sacred past and secular future. Original stone walls rose toward ceiling beams that still bore carved crosses, but the floor was poured concrete, cold and modern. Someone had installed floor-to-ceiling windows where the altar once stood, offering a panoramic view of the city waking to Christmas morning, all glass towers and streaming lights, utterly indifferent to the girl hiding in its forgotten spaces. Isolde collapsed against the far wall, as far from the windows as possible, and finally let herself feel the weight of the night. Her body ached. Her mind reeled, and the quickening pulsed steadily in her abdomen, growing stronger with each passing hour, as if the child inside her was feeding on her terror and transforming it into power. She opened the sanguine texts with shaking hands, squinting at the cramped script in the dim pre-dawn light. Marcus had marked a passage with a strip of aged silk. The progenitor's chosen bears the first hybrid, born of mixed blood and ancient covenant. She is human no longer, yet not vampire. She exists in the space between, where all transformations begin. Her pregnancy defies mortal time. The gestation period measures not in months but in moons. 7 blood moons from conception to birth. 7 cycles for the old world to prepare for its ending. 7 blood moons. Isolde's hand moved to her stomach, feeling the impossible life reshaping her from the inside out. Not 9 months. Weeks, maybe. The supernatural pregnancy was accelerating, her body adapting to forces that shouldn't exist, magic rewriting biology 1 cell at a time. She kept reading, desperate for anything that might help her survive. The chosen will manifest abilities as the heir grows, strength beyond mortal limits, sight beyond mortal perception, and the voice, the ability to command those bound by blood, to speak and be obeyed by all who carry the vampire curse. But power comes with cost. The transformation burns through mortal flesh. Without proper nourishment, the chosen's body will consume itself to feed the heir. Isolde's stomach twisted with hunger she hadn't noticed until the text named it. Not normal hunger. Something deeper, more demanding. The kind of craving that came from her bones, her blood, the growing thing that needed more than she had to give. She needed to eat, but more than that, she needed blood. The realization made her laugh, the sound edged with hysteria. She'd signed a contract to give Dominic her blood, and now her own body was demanding she take blood from someone else. The irony was vicious. Through the stained glass windows, dawn broke over the city in shades of gold and crimson, Christmas morning spilling across skyscrapers and snow-covered streets. Carolers would be singing soon. Families opening presents. The world celebrating birth and hope and miracles while Isolde sat alone in a half-sacred space, pregnant with something that might save humanity or devour it. The contrast wasn't lost on her. Ancient pregnancy in a modern cathedral. Supernatural transformation in a city built on steel and ambition. A girl from nowhere carrying the future of 2 species in her womb while the present went on without her. She pulled her coat tighter, tucking the sanguine texts inside where they rested against the quickening pulse. The loft was cold, unheated, but something about the consecrated stone kept the chill from being unbearable. Marcus had been right. Dominic couldn't enter here without invitation. The old laws still held, even in this bastardized space. For the first time since signing the blood oath, Isolde felt something other than terror. Not safety, not peace, but something close to determination. She touched her abdomen, feeling the air respond to her attention with a pulse of warmth. "We're going to survive this," she whispered to the child who was already more than a child, already a catalyst for revolution. "Both of us, whatever it takes." The stained glass saints looked down with faded eyes, their expressions unreadable. Blessing or warning, Isolde couldn't tell. Outside, the city hummed with life. Inside the winter sanctuary, something older than the city began to grow. Through the blood bond, she felt Dominic stop at the cathedral's entrance, felt his frustration as the consecrated ground refused him entry, felt his rage transmute into grudging respect. He couldn't reach her here. But he could wait. And Isolde knew, reading the prophecies by dawn light, that waiting was exactly what he'd do. Because the texts were clear about one thing above all else. The heir couldn't be born without the father present. Whether Dominic wanted to or not, he would return. And when he did, she needed to be ready to face him not as prey, but as something he'd never encountered before. His equal. Or his end. Lady Alara Corvine stood in Dominic's sanctum, staring at the glowing throne with the kind of hatred that took centuries to perfect. She'd spent 400 years positioning herself as the logical choice for queen, cultivating alliances, eliminating rivals, waiting with the patience only immortals possessed. And now some human girl with delusions of significance had burned her claim into the seat of power with a signature written in blood that shouldn't exist. Royal Ichor, Marcus Thorne said quietly from behind her, his tone carefully neutral. The analysis came back an hour ago. Her blood carries markers we haven't seen since the progenitor walked the earth. Alara's perfectly manicured fingers curled into fists. She was beautiful in the way predators were beautiful, all sharp edges wrapped in silk and diamonds, her platinum hair swept into a chignon that probably cost more than most mortals made in a year. Everything about her screamed power, breeding, aristocracy. Everything except the desperation currently tightening her crimson mouth. "Where is Dominic?" she demanded. "Outside the cathedral where she's hiding. He's been there since dawn. And he hasn't dragged her out by her hair because..." Consecrated ground. Marcus moved to stand beside her, his expression unreadable. "He can't enter without invitation. The old laws still bind him." Alara laughed, the sound like glass breaking. "How convenient. The girl picks the one place in this entire godforsaken city where he can't reach her." She turned from the throne, her gown sweeping across the marble with a whisper of expensive fabric. "Tell me about her. This Isolde Vance. What makes her so special that the progenitor's magic recognized her?" "We don't know yet. Her background is unremarkable. Working class. No family history of supernatural connection. Her sister is dying, and she signed the oath to pay for treatment. So she's desperate and stupid. Perfect." Alara's smile was all venom. "And Dominic believes she's actually carrying the heir, that this isn't some elaborate fraud." Marcus hesitated, and that pause told Alara everything she needed to know. "You've seen proof," she said flatly. "The mark doesn't lie, Lady Corvine. If it appeared on Dominic's throne, then she's carrying the first hybrid. The prophecies are unfolding exactly as the texts predicted." Alara moved to the windows overlooking the snow-covered city, her reflection ghostly in the glass. 400 years. 4 centuries of playing the long game, of being the perfect consort, the ideal political match. And now some mortal girl was going to steal everything because she'd accidentally gotten pregnant with a miracle. "The court doesn't know yet," Alara said quietly. "No, Dominic has kept it contained to those in this room. And if the court were to discover that a human carrying a hybrid heir was hiding in an old cathedral, unprotected, vulnerable..." Alara turned, her expression sharp as a blade. "The conservatives would see her as an abomination. The traditionalists would demand her execution. Even the progressives would want her contained, studied, controlled." Marcus's voice carried a warning. "Lady Corvine, Dominic has ordered." "Dominic ordered you to watch and report. He said nothing about what I might do with my own resources." Alara pulled out her phone, the screen casting blue light across her perfect features. "The Wraith Guild owes me 3 favors. I think it's time to collect." "You're sending assassins after her." "I'm ending a threat before it destroys everything we've built." Alara's fingers flew across the screen, composing a message with the efficiency of someone who'd ordered deaths before. "Consecrated ground protects her from Dominic, but it won't stop mortals. Humans can enter churches freely, and the Wraith Guild specializes in making problems disappear without supernatural fingerprints." Marcus stepped forward, his scholarly demeanor cracking. "If you kill her, you'll start a war. Dominic won't forgive." "Dominic will thank me once he's thinking clearly again." Alara sent the message, the phone chiming softly. He's fascinated by her because she's novel, because she represents something he's never encountered. But fascination fades. Duty remains. And his duty is to the court, to our bloodlines, not to some pregnant human who accidentally triggered a prophecy. The heir. The heir dies with her. Problem solved. Alara slipped the phone back into her clutch, her composure returning like armor. The Wraith Guild will make it look like a random attack. Christmas morning violence. Tragic but not uncommon in this city. Dominic will mourn his lost curiosity for a decade or two, and then we'll continue as we were meant to. Marcus's jaw tightened. You're making a mistake. No, Marcus. Dominic made the mistake when he signed that oath without understanding what he was binding himself to. Alara moved toward the door, her heels clicking against marble. I'm simply correcting it before the entire vampire world realizes their king has been claimed by a human girl carrying a bastard heir. She paused at the threshold, glancing back at the glowing throne one final time. By tonight, that mark will have no one left to claim it. The throne will be empty again, and I'll be right where I've always belonged. Her smile was all poison and promise. At Dominic's side, where no mortal can ever threaten me again. The door closed behind her with a soft click. Marcus stood alone in the sanctum, staring at the heir's mark pulsing with golden light, and made a choice that would define the next 1,000 years. He pulled out his own phone and typed a single message to a number that didn't officially exist. They're coming for her. Wraith Guild, tonight, warn her. He hit send before he could reconsider, committing treason against both his king and the woman who would have been queen. Because Marcus Thorne had spent 300 years studying prophecies, and he knew something Alara didn't. The texts were never wrong. And they all agreed on one thing. Those who tried to kill the progenitors chosen didn't just fail. They burned. The warning came at sunset, a text from an unknown number that simply read, "They're coming. Lock the door. Don't let anyone in." Isolde stared at her phone screen, her stomach dropping. She'd spent the day reading the sanguine texts, learning about powers she didn't yet possess and transformations she couldn't stop. The quickening had grown stronger, more insistent, the air inside her demanding more energy, more blood, more everything. She'd managed to eat some convenient store food she'd grabbed during a desperate morning run, but it wasn't enough. Her body was burning through resources faster than she could replenish them. Now someone was coming to kill her. She moved to the windows, looking out over the city as the sun bled into the horizon, turning the snow-covered streets crimson and gold. Through the blood bond, she felt Dominic still waiting somewhere below, his presence a constant pressure against her awareness. He'd been there all day, patient as stone, but she sensed something had changed. His attention had shifted, sharpened, as if he detected the same threat she had. The door to the loft rattled softly. Isolde spun, her heart hammering. The deadbolt was engaged, but that wouldn't stop professionals. She'd read enough crime novels to know that locks only slowed down people who wanted in badly enough. Isolde Vance. The voice came from outside, smooth and professional. We're here on behalf of Lady Corvain. Open the door, make this easy. Wraith Guild. The name surfaced from some article she'd read years ago about corporate assassins who operated in the gray spaces between legal and lethal. Humans who killed for money, no supernatural abilities required, just skill and cold efficiency. I'm not opening anything, Isolde called back, her voice steadier than her hands. A pause, then, we can do this the hard way if you prefer. The lock began to spark, some kind of torch cutting through the metal with professional precision. Isolde backed toward the far wall, toward the stained glass windows and the drop that would kill her if she tried to jump. Trapped. She was trapped in a consecrated space that protected her from vampires but did nothing against human killers. The quickening pulsed hard in her abdomen, almost painfully, and something else pulsed with it. Heat. Power. The sensation she'd been reading about in the texts, the abilities that manifested when the chosen was threatened. The door burst open. 3 figures entered, dressed in black tactical gear, faces covered, weapons drawn. Professional. Efficient. already moving to flank her. "Nothing personal," the lead assassin said. "Just business." He raised his gun. And Isolde felt something inside her break open like a dam giving way. The voice erupted from her throat, not her words but something older, something that had been sleeping in her blood since the oath was signed. "Stop!" The command hit the room like a shockwave. The three assassins froze mid-step, their bodies going rigid, their weapons clattering to the floor. Their eyes widened behind their masks, confusion and terror mixing in equal measure as they realized they couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything except obey. Isolde stared at her own hands, feeling power coursing through her like electricity. The voice, the ability to command through blood magic to speak and be obeyed. But these were humans, not vampires. They shouldn't be affected by vampire compulsion. Unless she wasn't using vampire compulsion. Unless what grew inside her was already changing the rules. "Leave," Isolde said, her voice resonating with that same ancient authority. "Forget you saw me. Forget Lady Corvin sent you. Go home and never take another contract against me or my child." The assassins turned mechanically, zombies responding to programming, and walked out of the loft without a word. She heard their footsteps receding down the stairs, heard the building's entrance door open and close, and then silence. Isolde's legs gave out. She collapsed against the wall, trembling violently, the power that had flooded through her now receding like a tide, leaving her drained and gasping. The quickening pulsed steadily, almost soothingly, as if the air was pleased with their mother's first display of strength. Through the blood bond, she felt Dominic's shock, his sudden realization of what she'd just done. He'd been watching the building, had seen the assassins enter and then leave, confused and compelled. He knew now what she was becoming. Not his servant, not his victim. His equal. Isolde pulled herself up, moving to the broken door and looked out into the hallway. Empty, safe for now, but Alara would send others. More assassins, more threats, more attempts to end the lineage before it could begin. She touched her abdomen, feeling the air respond with a pulse of warmth. "I don't need him," she whispered to the child, who was already making her into something more than human. "I don't need a king to protect us. I don't need anyone." But even as she said it, she felt Dominic moving, felt his decision crystallize through the bond. He was coming. Not to the cathedral entrance where consecrated ground held him back, but somewhere else, somewhere he could finally reach her. The standoff was ending. And Isolde realized with terrible clarity that she wasn't afraid anymore. She was ready. Outside the stained glass windows, the moon rose over the city, full and blood-red, the first of 7 that would mark her transformation from victim to sovereign. The prophecy was unfolding exactly as the texts predicted. And nothing, not Dominic's rage or Alara's jealousy or the entire vampire court sphere, was going to stop it. Dominic stood at the threshold of the cathedral loft, waiting for permission he'd never needed before in 5 centuries of existence. The broken door hung open, an invitation of sorts, but the consecrated ground still held. He could feel it pressing against him like an invisible wall, ancient magic that predated his transformation, that remembered when vampires were hunted rather than feared. "You can enter," Isolde said from inside, her voice carrying that new resonance he'd felt through the blood bond when she'd commanded the assassins. "But no violence, not here, not tonight." The compulsion in her words was subtle but unmistakable. She wasn't asking, she was ordering. Dominic smiled despite himself and stepped across the threshold. The loft was exactly as Marcus had described, half sacred, half secular, caught between what it was and what developers wanted it to become. But his attention wasn't on the architecture. It was on the woman standing by the stained glass windows, backlit by the blood moon rising over the city. She looked different, not dramatically, but in ways that made his predatory instincts sharpen with recognition. Her posture was straighter, more certain. Her eyes held power that hadn't been there 3 nights ago when she'd signed the oath with trembling hands. And beneath her coat, he could sense the quickening, the impossible life growing faster than nature allowed, rewriting biology with every pulse. "You sent assassins," Isolde said, not accusatory, just stating fact. "That was Alara. I've been here the entire time, as you well know." Dominic moved deeper into the loft, noting the sanguine texts open on the floor, the convenience store wrappers, the signs of someone living rough. "I felt what you did to them. The voice. You shouldn't have that ability yet, not until the second blood moon at earliest. Maybe the heir is impatient. Or maybe you're stronger than the prophecies predicted." Dominic stopped several feet away, maintaining the distance she demanded. "Marcus told me about the royal ichor, about what your blood signature means." Isolde's hand moved to her abdomen protectively. And I've spent 3 days trying to decide whether to worship you or destroy you." His voice was quiet, honest in a way he rarely allowed himself to be. "The mark on my throne says you outrank me. Every law that governs our kind says I should kneel. But I've been a king for centuries, Isolde. I don't kneel easily." "I'm not asking you to kneel." "No," Dominic tilted his head, studying her with the intensity of something that had spent lifetimes reading prey. "Then what are you asking?" "Nothing." Isolde moved away from the window, and he noticed she wasn't backing down, wasn't retreating. She was positioning herself, controlling the space between them with the instinct of someone learning to rule. "I didn't ask to carry your heir, didn't ask to have your crown burned into my blood, didn't ask for any of this, but it's mine now, whether I wanted it or not." "So what will you do with it?" The question hung between them, weighted with implications. Through the blood bond, Dominic felt her considering, felt the rapid calculation happening behind those fierce eyes. She was terrified, he realized. Absolutely terrified. But she'd learned something in the past 3 days that he'd taken centuries to master. How to be terrified and dangerous at the same time. "I'm going to survive," Isolde said finally. "I'm going to protect this child, and I'm going to change the rules of a world that thinks I should be grateful to be someone's property." Ambitious. Necessary. She took a step closer, and Dominic found himself surprised by his own restraint. He could kill her. Even with her new abilities, even with the voice, he was still faster, stronger, infinitely more experienced. But something stopped him. Not the old laws, not the prophecies. Curiosity. "Alara will send more assassins," he said. "The court will demand answers about the mark, and when they discover you're carrying the first hybrid, half of them will want to study you like a laboratory specimen, and the other half will want you burned for heresy." "Then I'll deal with them." Isolde's voice didn't waver. "The same way I dealt with the Wraith Guild. With power you barely understand, and can't fully control." "With power that's mine." She met his eyes without flinching. "You came here expecting to find a victim, didn't you? A scared girl you could intimidate into coming back to your tower, into playing whatever role you'd decided she should fill." Dominic said nothing, but his silence was answer enough. "I'm not a battery, Dominic, not a blood source, not a convenient incubator for your legacy." Isolde's hand rested on her abdomen, where the quickening pulsed visibly now, a golden glow beneath her skin. "I'm carrying the future of both our species. That makes me a queen whether you acknowledge it or not." The word settled between them like a gauntlet thrown. Dominic had ruled for 500 years, had crushed rebellions, outlasted rivals, built an empire from blood and ruthless calculation. He'd never met anything he couldn't dominate or destroy. Until now. He looked at Isolde Vance, this human girl who'd accidentally become the most dangerous creature alive, and felt something he hadn't experienced in centuries. "Respect." "What do you want from me?" he asked quietly. "An alliance." Isolde's voice was steady. "Not a master and servant, not even king and queen, partners, because that child needs both of us alive if it's going to survive, and we both know it." Dominic considered this, weighing centuries of absolute authority against the prophecy burning itself into reality before his eyes. The heir couldn't be born without him. The texts were clear, but it also couldn't survive without her newfound power. They needed each other. The realization should have enraged him. Instead, it felt almost like relief. Partners, he repeated, tasting the word. Equal stakes, equal power. Equal respect, Isolde corrected. Dominic smiled, the expression holding genuine amusement for the first time in decades. You're going to be insufferable, aren't you? Probably. A ghost of a smile crossed her lips. But you're going to help me anyway. Because of the heir. Because you're curious what happens next. She was right, and they both knew it. Dominic extended his hand across the space between them. Alliance, then, until the heir is born and the new world begins. Isolde studied his hand for a long moment before taking it, her grip firm despite the trembling he felt through the blood bond. Until the new world begins, she agreed. And in the sanctuary, under the blood moon's light, the vampire king and the human queen made a pact that would reshape eternity. New Year's Eve arrived with unseasonable warmth, the snow that had blanketed the city for a week melting into rain that streamed down the cathedral's stained glass windows like tears or baptism. Isolde stood before those windows, one hand pressed against the glass, the other resting on her abdomen, where the air had grown impossibly fast over the past 7 days. 7 days. 7 nights. The first blood moon had passed, and her body had transformed in ways the sanguine texts could only partially explain. She was stronger now, fast enough to blur when she moved. Her senses had sharpened until she could hear heartbeats 3 floors down, could smell the copper-sweet scent of blood from blocks away. The hunger had grown with the power, demanding sustenance she'd learned to take from the blood bags Dominic provided without comment or judgment. She was becoming something between human and vampire, something new. The court is gathering, Dominic said from behind her, his presence no longer triggering her flight instinct. They'd spent the week in careful alliance, learning to navigate the blood bond without drowning in each other's thoughts, establishing boundaries that felt less like walls and more like negotiations. They know about the heir. Ilara made sure of that. Let them know. Isolde turned from the window, meeting his eyes without flinching. She wore black now, not because he'd asked, but because it felt right, appropriate for someone preparing to rule over darkness. What can they do about it? Declare you an abomination. Demand your execution. Rally the old families against the prophecy. Dominic moved closer, and she noticed he no longer carried himself with quite the same absolute certainty. The mark on his throne had humbled him in ways 5 centuries of power never had. Or they can accept that the world is changing whether they approve or not. Which will they choose? That depends on you. He gestured toward the loft's entrance, where Marcus stood waiting with a garment bag. The court expects you to appear as a supplicant, Dominic's human pet who got lucky. If you walk in looking like a victim, they'll treat you like one. And if I walk in looking like a queen? Dominic's smile was sharp. Then we find out how many of them are wise enough to kneel before they're forced to. Marcus approached with the garment bag, his expression carefully neutral. Lady Vance, I took the liberty of preparing something appropriate for tonight's gathering. Isolde unzipped the bag and found a gown inside, black silk that seemed to drink the light, cut in a style that was both modern and timeless. No crown, no jewelry, nothing ostentatious. Just power distilled into fabric. It's perfect, she said quietly. Thank you, Marcus. The scholar inclined his head, but she saw approval in his ancient eyes. He'd chosen his side the night he'd warned her about the assassins, had committed himself to the prophecy even when it meant betraying centuries of loyalty. Outside, the rain intensified, washing away the last remnants of Christmas snow. The city was transforming, preparing for midnight, for the moment when 1 year died and another was born. Isolde felt the symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. She changed quickly, the gown fitting perfectly, moving with her like a second skin. When she looked at herself in the cracked mirror someone had propped against the wall, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Not the girl who'd signed the blood oath a week ago, not the terrified fugitive who'd hidden in this sanctuary. Someone else entirely. Someone who looked like she could rule. The air is getting restless, she said, feeling the quickening pulse harder, faster, as if the child inside her knew something significant was about to happen. How much longer? 6 more blood moons, Dominic replied. 6 more weeks until the birth. 6 weeks for the old world to accept its ending. Isolde moved toward the door, toward whatever waited beyond the sanctuary's protection. Think they'll manage it? No, Dominic fell into step beside her, and for the first time since they'd met, they walked as equals. But they'll learn, one way or another. They descended the cathedral stairs together, Marcus following at a respectful distance. The rain soaked through Isolde's hair within seconds, but she didn't care. The cold felt good, clarifying, as if the city itself was washing away what she'd been and preparing her for what she was becoming. A car waited at the curb, black and sleek, the kind of vehicle that announced power without needing to. The driver opened the door without a word, and Isolde slid inside, Dominic settling across from her. Through the tinted windows, she watched the city stream past, all light and rain and humanity going about their celebrations, completely unaware that their world was about to change forever. "Are you afraid?" Dominic asked quietly. "Terrified," Isolde admitted, "but I've learned something this week." "What's that?" "Fear doesn't matter, power does." She met his eyes across the car's interior. "And I have power now, whether the court likes it or not." The car pulled up to Valerius Tower, the same building where she'd signed away her freedom 7 days and a lifetime ago. But she wasn't arriving as a servant tonight. She was arriving as something the vampire world had never seen before. The progenitor's chosen, the carrier of the first hybrid, the woman who would birth a new dynasty or burn the old one to ash. Isolde stepped out of the car into the rain, and the world held its breath. Inside the tower, the court was waiting. Outside, midnight approached, bringing with it the death of the old year and the birth of something unprecedented. And standing in the rain with power pulsing through her blood and an impossible heir growing in her womb, Isolde Vance smiled. The new world was beginning. And she was ready. If you stayed until the end, you didn't just watch a story. You witnessed the birth of a new world. Liking this video tells the algorithm this story deserved to live. Subscribing means you won't abandon Isolde when the war truly begins. Stories like this only continue when the ones who finished them choose to stay.